Well, let's talk copper. You can see it's down a little bit today, but in London, it's near a record high. The prospect of copper tariffs has distorted the US market. It turned out this summer that Trump wasn't actually putting a tariff on raw copper. Let's get more from Sam Crittenden, mining analyst at RBC Capital Markets. Sam, great to see you, and thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Just remind us, normally copper mines, they're such demanding, huge-scale enterprises. There's going to be technical problems, but this year has been particularly marked.
Definitely. So in a typical year, you expect to see about 5% of production kind of not reach its full capacity. This year, we're tracking closer to 7%, and that was accentuated by the issue that Freeport had at their large Grasberg mine in Indonesia back in September. That's almost 4% of global supply. They had an unfortunate mud rush into the block cave there. That follows Ivanhoe having issues, seismic issues at their Kamoa-Kakula mine back in May. Codelco's El Teniente had some issues throughout the summer. And then on top of a number of slower than expected ramp-ups, that's really kind of underpinned some of these supply disruptions that we've had so far this year.
Can you just remind us of the position with U.S. tariffs? If I'm right, this summer, the U.S. administration did not put tariffs on raw copper, but they did put a big 50% levy on imports of semi-finished copper products, like copper pipes, for example.
Yeah, I'm having a bit of deja vu because I think I was on this program back before the tariff decision back in July. And so, as you say, they decided they weren't going to put tariffs on refined copper. And the expectation was that maybe some of that metal that had been imported would leave the U.S. However, in that, it was almost kind of a footnote that they would reassess the tariff situation next June. And so you could be looking at potential tariffs starting in 2027. And so all of that metal that went into the U.S. has stayed there. Basically about 500,000 tons flowed into the U.S. year to date, which is 2 or 3% of global demand, and so pretty meaningful. And that hasn't left. That's sticky, that's sitting in exchanges, and that's unlikely to change until you get further clarity. And we've seen that accelerate again here, where you're still seeing metal flow into the U.S., and then that leaves other exchanges, other markets tight of copper.
That's interesting. So the copper is sitting there. And is that, did you say that's in anticipation of Trump possibly putting extra tariffs on the metal?
That's the thought. I mean, obviously, no one knows for sure. But if there were to be a tariff announced middle of next year and implemented in 2027, if you're holding that metal within the U.S., you could potentially sell it for a premium for what you could sell it elsewhere. And so that's why that metal hasn't really left. It's why it's still sitting there.
Will this data build out in America, and on paper it's going to be huge, will that materially increase demand for copper?
It certainly could. I mean, there's just been such a massive push towards AI data centers, and that CapEx is real. It's happening now. It is very copper intensive. I mean, do we see it in the demand numbers now? Maybe not necessarily, but it certainly is underpinning demand in sort of new energy forms and will be a growing source of demand going forward. There's no question. I mean, there's debate around what the ultimate scale could be, but it certainly can be quite large and quite meaningful in the copper demand space.
I think I picked the wrong career. I should have become an electrical engineer. You can name I think I heard some experts in the field are getting $500,000 a year now.
Yeah, no kidding.
You have some copper suggestions for it when it comes to stocks, including Capstone. They're in pretty stable jurisdictions such as Chile and the U.S.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the big appeals for Capstone, and so the bulk of their value is in Chile and the U.S. This company has the potential to essentially double their copper production over the next 5 years. They're going to give you some incremental growth in the near term as they ramp up their large Manto Verde mine. And ultimately, if they decide to build the Santo Domingo project, it can take copper production from about 200,000 tons this year to nearly 400,000 tons over the next 4 or 5 years. And so good copper production growth, countries you feel comfortable investing in.
Also Hudbay, good old Hudbay, big production in Latin America, among other things.
Yeah, so Hudbay is actually about 30% gold and 70% copper. That's due to their gold production in Manitoba. And so they've been benefiting from both the record gold prices and these record copper prices, generating really strong free cash flow for the last several quarters. That's expected to continue. And the other key for Hudbay is they're developing their Copper World project in Arizona. Yeah. This one's been stalled in permitting for a long time now, but the climate has changed, and they finally have all the permits in hand to build this. They have a strong partner with them at the table, and so we expect them to start construction on that as early as next year, and that gives them a next leg of growth.
Who is their partner there? Can you remind us?
It's Mitsubishi.
Oh, yeah. And just finally, First Quantum, there does seem to be a prospect of the huge Panama mine reopening.
Definitely. And look, there's still certainly risk and uncertainty around this, and I would frame it as a risk-reward play. However, the government is undergoing an environmental audit of the mine right now, which we expect to be finished in the first quarter of next year, at which point they'll kick off formal negotiations with First Quantum. And, I think that, again, the climate seems like it could be shifting somewhat in that country, and we could be looking at potential for it to restart next year sometime, which obviously would be a pretty big catalyst and pretty meaningful for First Quantum.
Thank you very much, Sam. Really appreciate it.